Let's go.
And for those of you who joined late, I'll mention it one last time. Johnny does give private lessons, so if you want some of that from him, hit him up in iRacing. And at the same time, if you want to buy him a beer, which means send him a few credits, it's always appreciated on his side. He does a lot of work for these.
So for turn one, it's very common to see a lot of people not use the whole width of the track through here, especially because you can see how the pit wall sort of goes outward to the last few meters. So even if you're parallel to the pit wall at the beginning of the straight, as you cross that start-finish line, by the end of the straight, you won't be right by the wall, so you almost have to drive along and even turn right a little bit, just to ensure that you're right next to the wall and make the track as wide as possible. Pretty much around this point, it was where I typically start to get on the brakes and turn in simultaneously. So through here, I'm not really getting on the brakes hard. I'm pretty much just brushing them a little bit as I turn in. The reference I use is that seam on the concrete right in front of me. I don't know if you can spot it, but the one I'm running over right now. So by around this point, I'm already turning in, maybe a little bit on the brakes. And through here, what you're aiming for is to get your inside tires as close to this yellow line on the inside as possible. Preferably, try to get your left-hand tires just over the yellow line. Try to not go too wide. It's not a huge deal, but as long as you keep it within half a meter either side of the yellow line, you'll be fine. So by around this point, you want to be right on it, more or less, maybe even a little bit towards the inside. And then eventually, you're spotting your apex, which is right where that cone is, right on top of the fence. Obviously, get as close to the wall as possible and back on the throttle as early as possible. Through here, you've probably found out it's pretty hard to gauge when you can get back on the throttle simply because you can't actually see the rest of the corner or the exit. You just need to get a feel for it. And if anything, it's better to just delay it a tiny bit just so that you can straighten your wheel as early as possible. Even if you're slightly later on the throttle, that'll be a little bit faster than getting on the throttle just 100th earlier, but instead having to turn the wheel for longer, because that scrub will really fight against your acceleration and negate the extra speed you gain by getting on the throttle earlier. In general, pretty much try to favor slightly later throttle just to be able to straighten the wheel earlier. They call it Low King turn 2, so this next corner is turn 3. And through here, I'm braking it around this point. Nearly 5-ish meters, maybe a little bit less, before the second set of cones on the right side. So I'll be braking, I believe, in 4th gear, so I'll drop 2 gears into 2nd. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention, turn 1, I'll only typically drop 1 gear into 4th, I believe. And through this whole section, it really does look, especially the last corner in this section, it really looks like it would favor a really late apex. And it does, but it doesn't necessarily favor a late turn in. So through here, pretty much I'd say I'm turning in quite a bit earlier than you'd expect. I'm obviously apexing late, which is you want to do, but you don't want to apex late and turn in late. So you're gonna keep it fairly tight throughout the whole corner, but definitely apex pretty late. Because you really don't realize, but you can gain so much extra speed through this section just by having that tighter line. Not only are you covering more distance, but you can just keep that extra bit of speed by turning in later and keeping the speed up. And through this corner, turn 3, what you're looking for your apex to be is pretty much maybe 4 meters before the end of the curving on the inside. So right around this point is where I'd actually start to get on the curbing. From this point through turn 4, the next right-hander, right up till I start braking for turn 5, I'll be completely on the throttle. So from this point onwards, still in second gear, completely on the throttle, but it's very important to get the car right by the edge of the track on the right side before entering turn 5 here. And I'll typically start pretty similar to turn 1. I won't have a conventional hard braking zone and then turn in. I'll sort of merge the two and just brush the brakes a little bit as I'm turning in. I'd start doing that by around this point, so maybe by the end of the curbing on the right side. And again, you want to turn in a little bit earlier than you expect, but you definitely want to apex late. It's a weird sort of concept because usually when you want to apex late, you also turn in late. But just the way these two corners are, the way they sort of, the radius starts pretty wide and then it gets a little bit tighter. It makes it so that it makes sense once you start actually driving it. And you're looking through here, you're looking for your apex to be that pointy bit on the curb on the inside. I don't know if you can see it, but right where I think it's more noticeable on the actual yellow paint before the curb where there's a bit of a pointy bit sticking out. So right here is where I'd just kiss that inside curb, not get completely on it, but just kiss it and get on the throttle as early as you can to ideally use a little bit of this exit curb. You don't want to use too much of it, even if you don't touch the dirt after it. You don't want to use more than about half of it, simply because it's such a high curb, the bottom of your car will actually start scraping and you'll lose a lot of speed. Yeah, but that whole section, it's pretty counterintuitive, but as soon as you start forcing yourself to drive it that slight bit differently and turning in a little bit earlier with more speed, you'll see a huge difference in your delta bar. And now for the hairpin. So I'll ignore that first set of cones on the left side, and I'll brake at around this point. So again, and maybe about 5 meters before the set of 3 cones on the left side. And I'll drop down from 5th all the way down to 1st, so shift down 4 years. And through here, again, it makes sense to, because it's a hairpin, it makes sense to keep it right by the edge of the track, so really slow it down, and then turn in pretty late. But actually, it's a little bit faster to treat it not too much like a hairpin and more like a conventional corner, and that you want to turn it a little bit earlier than you expect, carry the speed through the corner, and maybe get on the throttle a little bit later than you would otherwise, but it's definitely faster this way because you'll make a lot of time through the actual corner and even going down the straight, because when you do get back on the throttle, you're already going quicker anyways. Then on exit here, I'm pretty sure they changed the track a little bit since last season, because I remember being able to cut a lot more of the grass on the left side here without getting off track, whereas now I think you can only get away with about 1 tire's width on it. So yeah, definitely use that if you ever need to. Yeah, so then going down the back straight, if you got a good enough exit out of the hairpin, you'll be able to shift right up, all the way up into 5th gear. And then coming up to turn 7, you'll be able to get on the brakes about, I'd say, a third of the way between this set of 3 cones on my left side and the next set of 2 cones. So yeah, I'd say about a third of the way from here to there, right around this point. So I'll get on the brakes, shift down 3 gears, so from 5th down into 2nd, And through here as well, this sort of corner favors a bit of an early turn in and just trying to carry quite a bit of speed through here. Just because it's not too important to sacrifice your exit out of here to set up for the next two left-handers. It's actually a lot faster to really carry the speed through here and let the car on its entry speed alone. And as you get on the throttle, let it run pretty wide. So on a fast lap, I'll pretty much go as far as to even kiss this bit of exit curving. And even if you get completely on it, it should still be fairly easy to keep it tight through the next two left-handed apexes. So even going that wide, you want to keep it as close as you can to the inside here, and it should be fairly easy. What a lot of people seem to do is to really sacrifice their speed out of turn 7 to not reach the absolute edge of the track, just to make the two left-handers a little bit easier. When in reality, you don't really need to do that. You just lose a lot of speed trying to do that. And then coming up into... I don't know if anyone's keeping track of the turn numbers. I think it's turn 10. Tower corner. Before you actually brake, just because of the sort of angle you approach this corner at, it's useful to get the car right by the edge of the track and parallel as well before you actually start braking. And I'll start braking right around this point, so right where those two cones are on the left side. Start to brake. Again, pretty similar to turn 7. Turn in a little bit earlier than you expect. Just carry as much speed as you can through here. Preferably try to avoid abusing this curb and really get on the high part of it, just because it'll really bounce the car, and it also might damage your front wing if you hit it the wrong way. You can kiss it, that's fine, but preferably try to not get completely on it. And on exit, obviously, use all the space you can. You can even use the little tiny bit of dirt after that and not get the F track. Then going down this straight, that's not really straight. You can gain a few tenths by keeping it fairly tight between those two fast, flat-out left-handers. So really, I never go much wider than this. I pretty much have my inside tires on that black seam that runs across the track. And through here as well, you can turn in fairly early and cut quite a bit of it and make up a bit of time that way. Not a huge difference, but it definitely helps. And then coming up to this section, turn 13, I believe, I'll be braking maybe just a tiny bit earlier than halfway between the first set of reference cones and the second set. So there's the first set. I'd keep going a little bit, just a few meters to around this point, and then I'll get on the brakes for turn 13. And turn 13, it's really important for this section to really get this first turn, get it down correctly. Just because if you get it slightly wrong, it'll really throw you off for the next sequence of two corners, because they're all connected. If you get the first one wrong, you sort of lose the rhythm and you'll be offline for the next one or doing the wrong speed. Super important to use as much of this inside curb as you can through here. You don't necessarily want to go over it and start using the concrete on the inside, simply because the cars may sometimes start to drag on the actual curb and bottom out. Sometimes you get lucky and it doesn't really hurt you, but it's a lot more inconsistent. So most of the time I'll try to just use as much of the curb as I can. And you want to get on the throttle out of here early enough so that you do run pretty wide. So pretty similar to turn 7. it's not super crucial to delay the throttle to set up the next left-hander. You can go pretty far towards the outside. I more or less go about this far on most laps. If you ever have to touch the exit curb, that's definitely too far, and you'll struggle to keep it really tight through the next left-hander without lifting. As long as you go about this far, you'll be fine. So you can really get on throttle pretty early and use a lot more room. And you can still make this left-hander full throttle and keep it fairly tight all the way throughout.
What are you dropping down to for that first turn?
Third gear. For this whole section, I'll do the whole section in third gear, even the next corner that leads onto the back straight. So I'll keep it in third the whole way. And then coming out of turn 14, you want to aim your car towards the outside of the track a bit, so you can use quite a lot of that extra concrete on the left side that isn't actually, at least it doesn't look like it's actually part of the track, but it is in iRacing and in real life, I believe. And you pretty much want to sort of attack it around this angle. You can use quite a lot of space without getting an off-track or slowdown or anything like that. But you don't need to exaggerate it as much. So I'll only go about this wide on it, and pretty much around 5 meters after I got off that exit curb, that inside curb, I mean, I'll start braking. By around this point, I'll start to get on the brakes. Still in third gear, I'll keep it in third gear. And really, again, through here, it's really important to use as much as you can of the curb, but through here, definitely try to not go over and go past the curb and start to use the concrete after it, because then you'll definitely bottom out and lose quite a bit of speed and turning. Use as much as you can without going over. And on exit, obviously, as much space as you can use, the better.
If you would like more help from Johnny, he also does private coaching sessions. You can find his contact information down below in the description if you're interested.
Alright, then finally, Sunset Bend. I think going through the corner, there is one true fast way. Coming out of it, there's quite a few different lines that are maybe just as quick once you're used to them. But going through the corner, I think the best way, at least in my experience, what I'll do is just drive up to this second set of 3 cones on the left side, and I'll start to turn in here, still full throttle. So I'll start to turn in, and really the best way to approach Sunset Bend is to know what references you're looking for. Through here, I typically look for 3 different references, or 3 different apexes, I guess. So I'll treat the corner as a 3 apex corner. And my first apex, which is what I'll be spotting at this point, right at the 3 cones as I'm starting to turn in, is just off to the left of the inside wall, right in front of me. So I'll turn in, get fairly close. Not super important to get as close to the inside wall as possible through here, but you want to get fairly close and really get your car in about this sort of position as you hit the brakes. So I'll be hitting the brakes at around this point, maybe between 5 and 10 meters before the wall on the inside. And through here, it's really important to, by this point, by the time you get on the brakes, you want your wheel to be completely straight. You're obviously approaching this corner in 5th gear. So you're braking a perfectly straight line, dropping down 2 gears into 3rd. You're obviously letting the car run out a little bit as you're braking in a straight line. And then by around this point, I'll start to ease off the brakes and start to spot my next reference. It's easier to explain once I actually get there because it's not too clear to see from all the way back here. But I think another good reference is that white line on the outside, where you never want to get closer than about this close to it, so about a meter away from it. You never really want to go much wider than that, simply because you end up covering a little bit too much distance. The next apex isn't where that cone is on the wall, which I just noticed. That's wrong. I don't know what instructor put that there. And your next apex will be precisely here. Pretty much, I don't know if you can see how on the that yellow line on the inside after the wall, there's a bit of a pointy bit. So I'll be trying to apex and position my car just a meter to the left of that. I want to lap after lap have my right hand tires go over this imaginary point, so just a meter to the left of that pointy bit on the yellow paint. And then final apex is as close to the wall as you can get by around this point. So really get as close to the wall as you can. And you'll find that in this weather, if you got the line right throughout the rest of the corner, if you weren't too tight or too wide, you should typically be able to get back on the throttle by around this point. So a little bit before you actually get to your last of the three apexes right by the wall, you should be able to get completely back on the throttle. And then on exit, rule of thumb is to just keep it as close to the inside as possible. Only go wide if the speed the car is carrying warrants you to go wide. Really try to not straighten the wheel just so you end up using all the track. Just keep it as tight as you can so you cover the least amount of distance possible. Something else to mention for Sunset Bend is, so you have that initial braking where you're dropping down 2 gears and you're braking in a straight line. After that though, as they get off the brakes and actually start to turn in looking for that second apex, from that point onwards, it's very helpful. And pretty much every lap you might have to do this, is to just brush your brakes to get the car to hug the inside of the corner a little bit more. And this is just like a 10% pressure on the brakes. It's a tiny pressure, but you're not really getting on the brakes to slow the car down. You're just getting on the brakes to transfer a bit of weight to the front tires and get the car to actually turn and hug the inside of the corner. Through there, pretty similar to turn 1. I think those are 2 corners where pretty much every single lap, I'll get on the brakes once to actually slow the car down a little bit, and then on the brakes again to get it to turn if it wasn't turning enough. But it's not a thing you should do automatically. Every lap is just a feel sort of thing where if you feel the car isn't turning, just brush the brakes a little bit. If the car's turning fine, don't worry about it. And that would be the lap.
Johnny was kind enough to share his replay of his time trials with us again this week, so we're going to go to that. Enjoy.